Welcome, everybody. It is Monday, January 22nd, 2018. This is the first official SIG release meeting for the Kubernetes 1.10 release. I'm Jay Singer-Dumars, your leader for this release, and I will be walking us through an agenda that is located at http://kates110-burndown. Whoa, what? Somebody have something they're trying to say that I walked all over? Nope, okay. So the agenda is at bit.ly kates110-burndown, and you can see that us follow along after the fact. So it is week 4 of 12 of the release, so we are starting to make progress into the release. This week, if you look at the timeline, it's actually, there's not a lot necessarily scheduled for this week other than feature freeze, but due to a large number of outstanding features that need to be documented and put into the features process, we are going to kick that deadline up a week. So basically people can have another week to work on getting the feature documentation in place. A little bit of explanation for those not necessarily familiar with the release process and why we do the features tracking separately. Essentially, it allows us to track release over release movement of major deliverables. So we can not only track what is the status is something alpha, beta, GA. We can create descriptions of what we're delivering in a way that can be used for marketing purposes so that people can learn what's in a release. And so it gives a little better view of what's being delivered than if you really read the release notes, which can be a little bit overwhelming. So the tracking process around those is a bit manual. Ihor Dvoretsky is handling this release again. And he has a spreadsheet that ties back to the information that's in GitHub. So there's essentially the source of truth is in GitHub, but it gets reflected in the spreadsheet that is linked in the release schedule, which if you click on the timeline link in the Burndown meeting minutes, you'll see a link to that. So this week there wasn't a lot on the schedule, but we're gonna kick that extension out. Caleb Miles, who is at Google and who is our branch manager of this release, had a bit of a bike accident. He's okay, but it did cause him to have a delay in his ability to get up to speed and get the requisite ACLs to do the alpha cut. So he's working on that, and I believe he's in onboarding this week. So hopefully we'll be able to hit our target of next week for the 1.10.0-alpha.2 release. So I marked in the timeline that's green. So I have absolute faith in Caleb's ability to deliver, and he is here if he wants to speak to any of that. You want to hit any of that, Caleb? Oh, looks like he might have lost his headphones. So we'll touch on that in a minute. So one of the things we're going to do this week, even though the feature freeze is going to get pushed off a week, we're going to look at what we can do to collect the marketing sort of information that we can get from what we have right now. So Ihor and I talked about the timeline for marketing and also how that might impact our overall feature timeline. And I feel confident that we can continue at pace even though we push the feature freeze up a week. If anybody disagrees, I'm welcome to counter opinions on that. Okay. Other things we need to do this week, we need to start digging into the CI signal and also into the issues. Right now, we'll see this in a moment, but there's 44 open issues in the milestone. That's in this phase of where we're at in the release, that's not unreasonable. There's a lot of stuff in there that's just tracking, and We don't know necessarily that those are true release blockers, but we should probably start looking into those, especially the ones that are marked as important, because there's 12 of those.
Yeah.
Was that?
Tim and I are meeting up today, and we're going to start through the releases. This is Josh.
Oh, hi, Josh.
Tim and I are meeting up today, and we're going to start going through the issues and trying, particularly with the goal right now of just simply trying to kick out things that don't belong in the milestone, that were put in the milestone because they were in a previous milestone, got kicked forward, but nobody's working on them, which will be probably about half of those.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So SIGs are responsible at this point to identify what is going to need. Of course, my internet connection goes wonky. SIGs need to identify what needs user-facing docs. There's been some talk about a label that's the user-facing label, and I'm not sure where that's at, but we should probably talk about that in the regular SIG release meeting just to touch base on it. For now, the way we've been doing it has been to have that flag in the actual features tracking spreadsheet. And I assume that barring any changes from EHOR or the SIG docs folks working on this release, we'll continue doing that, and that's where we'll track what needs user-facing docs versus not. EHOR and I also had a discussion this morning briefly about project tracking, and we've toyed with using the issues board in GitHub to do sort of high-level Kanban type tracking of the release. I haven't necessarily felt super thrilled with the way that's gone, and it's getting to the point where there's enough moving parts and enough team members and all that probably we should look at some sort of project tracking specific app. There's Trello, there's others. And probably we'll have a discussion about that in the SIG release meeting coming up, or maybe SIG PM. There's a bit of overlap there, so we'll have to figure out what is the best solution. But I would like to solicit opinions on that. If you have opinions about what has worked well for you in the past for managing projects like this, where you have a lot of moving parts and a lot of project milestones that need to be hit and tracked, I welcome that. I'd like to do it in as agile a way as possible, so I do have a preference for doing that in a sort of Kanban type way. But again, if you have strong opinions or preferences, hit me up on Slack, and I'd love to hear those. Lastly, for this week, I am going to be replacing Phil Whitrock as the co-lead of SIG release. Phil has had to step down due to being a busy dad and having a lot of responsibilities, and he nominated me as a replacement. There wasn't any, in the lazy consensus model, nobody screamed and yelled about it, so it seemed like that's going to move forward. So happy to, and honored actually to be in that position and serve everybody. So thanks.
I'm actually surprised to find out that you weren't already a lead of SIG release, but
well, the one thing I love about the Kubernetes servant leadership model is that you shouldn't necessarily know who's a lead. That everybody should be stepping up and leading from wherever they're at. So I'm glad that it's implicit now, but I also feel like the job continues unabashedly the way it has. So that's pretty much it for this week's timeline. I feel like most things are on track, with the exception of the alpha, which is totally doable. And honestly, the first alpha, I've never actually seen any cogent feedback come on a first alpha anyway, so I'm not really worried about that in the slightest. I think all signs are pointing to a delivery for next week.
Do we have any way to get numbers for people actually trying to install the alpha or even the betas for that matter?
Not that I'm aware of.
I'm not sure if we are collecting some data, especially from the open source Kubernetes to track that. Probably we may have some information from the vendors, but again, I'm not sure that that's really publicly available information.
It's just one of these things where I feel like we should at some point visit who's using the alpha releases, because if it turns out that the answer is nobody, then we have to say, okay, well, why are we doing alpha releases then?
We have Natasha and Caitlin from the CNC marketing team. I know that CNC has been running the poll, asking some questions from the Kubernetes users. So probably you have some information regarding that. Not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can figure it out.
I just
my personal thought is also like around 0.
Yeah, this is a question that I asked because I know I was working on another project where it turns out that there was 100% overlap between people who downloaded the alphas and people who downloaded the dailies, and that project ended up eliminating alpha releases because it was kind of pointless. And obviously, I mean, there may be other reasons to do alpha releases, like it's a good practice for packaging up the new release. But it's just a question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, right now the dominant opinion is that it's for the release team primarily. But the thing is, as the ecosystem enriches and more dependent projects need early feedback on their integrations, these alphas are going to become critical. And I keep saying that every release since like, I don't know what, but I keep hoping for that eventuality that people are testing their stuff early. Like I'd love to see more feedback from other projects.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the plugins that I know of don't even seriously start working on the integration until after the alphas come out. And so they don't have their stuff ready until beta time. I mean, that might be a good reason for the alphas to come out, just because it gets the plugins.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's some strong welling of support that we shouldn't do them, I absolutely believe we should continue. I think seeing the release candidate scuttled was enough movement in the early delivery part. So, yeah. All right. So moving through the sort of meeting agenda. Every week, or actually every meeting that we have, we're going to go through this agenda, and some of these things will apply, some of these won't. And what I would love is if you are one of the owners of things below the actual breakout by SIG, things like branch updates, build failures, test failures, etc. If you could update this sheet, the meeting minutes ahead of the meeting with your update, that would be fantastic. And also, if you could select red, yellow, or green in terms of your confidence in where things are at, that would be great. So, for example, if we're getting ready to release in a week and there's 1 million build failures, I would expect to see the status on that as red. So what this does is it gives future civilizations, as they unearth the archaeology of Kubernetes, to the ability to sort of see what the process was as we went through it, and also where we might have hit risk points and where we mitigated those risks. So again, that just sort of first blush red, yellow, green status helps us understand where things are at. Going by the numbers today, we are looking at 44 open issues. The vast majority of them are just the standard hodgepodge of no priority or low priority. Nothing has been identified as a black swan sort of waiting out in the wings. That's to be expected at this point. Open PRs in the milestone, there's 21 open versus 51 closed. In terms of prior releases, that's actually low. I'm a little bit surprised it's that low. I think people are still coming back from the holidays or something, but we'll probably see that escalate relatively fast. I went through the release blocking critical, these other PRs, and there weren't really anything in there that specifically that needed addressing, in my opinion. If there's some, as we go through these meetings, if you click on those links and see something that you want to talk about or that has particular interest to your area of the release, definitely do that. Put a link in there and we'll talk about it. And the links to the test grid dashboards, you can review those. Last check, nothing looked totally out of whack, but I haven't actually gone through that in the level of detail that I wanted to. So Josh and who's your shadow, Josh?
Tim. That's Tim Pepper.
Okay, if you guys want to hit any of those dashboards, talk about that, then good time to do that.
This is Sam. Just introduce some new feature on test grid. So if you open one of those dashboards, it's pretty easy to see the fading tests are showing up as red now on the actual dashboard. If you open SIG release master blocking, you can see most of them, the tabs are in blue color, but the ones are currently in a high failure rate is in red. So it's pretty easy to identify like which ones are passing, which ones are failing now.
Fantastic, Sen. Thank you. That is super, super helpful. Okay, moving right along. Looking at the per SIG issue counts. Looking pretty good. I mean, SIGNode is the sort of the hub of activity there. And a note about this too is that so any particular issue can have multiple SIGs attached, and so there's not a one-to-one relationship between count here. So when you have these issues, a lot of times SIGNode will be a secondary or somebody that's seen as a visibility on these issues. So it's typical that these the SIGNode count will be high, whereas some of the other SIG issues are typically pretty focused on those SIGs. Branch updates. I had the note in here about the alpha, which we'll be getting into here in a second. So, Caleb, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was out for I guess the last bit of last week. I'm recovering from a minor bike crash, but I'm going to try to get finished onboarded this afternoon with Dashpole, who's the branch manager for 1.9. So hopefully at the end of that onboarding, there will be an alpha if things are cuttable.
Cool. All right. And we don't have to worry about build failures yet. Test failure triage, and I mean, that's kind of, I don't know if Sen, if there's anything you want to talk about there, but pretty much this stuff is not really relevant yet. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete it unless you have something.
Yeah, not relevant to release yet, but we switched over our AWS account from Google sponsored to AWS to the CNCF account. So that account currently does not have enough quota yet. So you might see our AWS tasks will like randomly failing to bring up clusters and such things. AWS, I believe, is working with focusing Amazon to figure out the quota issues.
Okay.
I'm an all noded account, so on behalf of CNCF, I created the account for Kubernetes community on Amazon platform. So if you have any issues, please let me know and I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Just
also,
look in the threads.
Mm-hmm. My contact is Matt Lentis, who's part of SIG testing and from AWS, and he's like, he should be emailing like interesting parts to get the quota stuff to sorting out. if you can help, that would be also appreciated.
Yeah, just loop me in. So if you have any issues, I'll dive into.
Thanks.
Great. Let's go ahead and talk about documentation and marketing. So I saw Jared. I'm not sure. Let me look at the list here. Who's on the call from Docs right now?
I am Jennifer. I'm the Docs lead.
Cool.
And I updated that piece of it. I flagged it as yellow only because I have not done the sort of prep things yet, and I will get on those probably tomorrow.
Okay.
And then, I mean, what it says in the document, right?
Yeah. So we need to set up the 110 docs branch just like we have in the past and start haranguing SIGs. Jennifer, just because some people here might not know the process, do you mind explaining the docs branching strategy, because it's different than the release?
Right. We publish docs from master. So PRs against docs for a release go against a docs release, a numbered by the release. So this will be, I don't remember the exact syntax, I'm not looking at it right now, but basically it calls out the 1.10 release. This has created a little pain in the past, but one of my responsibilities is to make sure, and typically other SIGs maintainers also help, you sort of catch PRs that might be accidentally submitted against master when they should be submitted against a release branch. It's something that we'll occasionally whimper about if it looks, we're not at that point yet. But it's just that wrinkle. This is what you were asking about, right, Jace?
Yes, that exact thing, because it's slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep, we've talked about normalizing branching strategies, but we haven't got there. So we're doing it per the usual for 1.10.
And just so that folks know, the release branch will be called release-1.10.
Thank you, Jared.
Great. Okay. And
also just one note. So Jennifer today submitted a PR regarding with the Kubernetes doc release playbook. So please take a look at it, and if you have any questions, suggestions, please add them there. Or we can merge it as is and provide the new suggestions and edits in their upcoming PRs.
Yeah, that is not completely updated. It was simply my first attempt to get content that we've been maintaining in a Google Doc into the right repo with everybody else's role documentation. So it needs to get updated, and it also needs cross-references. SIG Docs the Docs release lead is now taking charge of generating the generated docs. It used to be a bit of a communication muddle. We're still ironing out the last wrinkles to that, but we have that documented elsewhere. So there's a bunch more information coming. Comments would be great. But if you see things you don't know about that refer only to the 1.7 release, we are aware and working to update.
Cool. Ihor, do you want to, or I'm not sure, I mean, features and marketing right now are sort of tied together. So I don't know if you or Natasha want to talk about anything there, but.
Just a brief update from the feature. Yep. Yeah, so just a brief update regarding the features that we currently have. We have 22 open features in the features repo that are targeting 1.10 milestone. Unfortunately, not all the feature owners have updated their features, because I found a few that may target 1.10 as well. So that was the primary reason why we've decided to extend the features deadline. At the same time, the key features and the key messages can be identified today and right now for the upcoming release. So I hope that starting from today, we can start working on our marketing strategy for 1 to 10 release.
Great. Natasha, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say we're going to meet later today just to look at the features, key messaging around them to the community, the blog outline, just kind of get all of those things in order and ready to go so we can move forward and get some solid drafts to the release team in early February, probably by February 6th to 10th. So that way we're a little ahead of the game.
Great. And we can definitely we'll put some sort of notes up somewhere that people can review after the fact if they're interested in that. Because we definitely want to have as much involvement as possible. So, all right, any other things? Caitlin, anything from you, or are you good? All right. Release notes update. So thankfully the draft was made. Thank you, Nick, for that. And what we'll start doing is working on populating that. I would love to know from Jennifer and Nick if you guys had any discussions about whether you wanted to do this in a Google Doc outside of the GitHub file, or what sort of you thought was the best practice there.
So first off, Nick is unfortunately not in this meeting because there's been some muddle about invites and lists that he should be on, and I just pointed him to the docs doc because it's got the administrative bits in it that he needs. And when I get out from under meetings, which I need to drop off as soon as I'm done speaking to you, because I've got another one now, and I'm literally in meetings for the next 6 hours, but I will ping on the release, on SIG release to make sure that we've got that sorted, because we didn't for 1.9 either, and I feel partly responsible for it. But we have talked, Nick would really like to see us moving to a better way of dealing with generated docs. Oh, there's Nick. I have just today, looking at Ihor's release list and thinking about the issues reviews, been thinking about some additional possibilities, but we have not actually sat down and talked about that. This is the first that Nick is hearing that I have been thinking about other possibilities. So we'll update you in the next meeting, or Nick can tell y'all what he's thinking about now because he's here and I need to.
Okay. Nick, do you want to just chime in on this, or do you want to hit this the next week's meeting once you have more to do? Okay. Next week, then, we will have that discussion. All right. Any announcements? I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone over to the assembled team. And any questions? Does this meeting feel like it was effective and useful for you? All that good stuff. So I'm going to turn my mic off and feel free to chime in. All right, from the deafening silence, I assume there are no announcements, no open mic items. So we will proceed. The last thing in the agenda item is a retro doc. So as we go through this process and you find things that are not working for you, or things that you would change, or things that are working and you would love to see us continue, please log those in the retro doc as we go through this process, so that once we release on March 21st and then have the retro the following week, we can discuss those and definitely find ways to integrate that feedback into the 1.11 release cycle. So again, just write them down while you're thinking of them, and it doesn't matter if they get duplicated later or you change your mind, but just write them down, and that helps us move the ball forward for sure. Anything before we adjourn? All right, everybody. Thanks. Have a fantastic Monday, and I will see you in a week.